Welcome back to the Zume Multiplying Disciples podcast, where we're on a journey to saturate the world with multiplying disciples in our generation. Excited to talk with you, Doug, and just what God is doing in the ways that you are seeing Zume and using it, but also creating these alternative ways to mix and match. And I would just love to hear your vision.
Thanks so much, Mary. It's an honor to be asked, and I'm just delighted anytime anybody asks anything about Zume. So I'm happy to respond. Zume to me is kind of, in a way, a dream come true, because I got to confess, Mary, I had trouble getting my arms around what was DMM, and when Zume rolled out, I finally had a set of, I don't know what you call hat hooks or coat hooks, to be able to hang ideas on, around about which I could finally fashion the answer I was going to give if somebody asked, what is DMM? I finally had a way to describe it.
So good. So how are you seeing Zume work in existing churches?
It's a hassle, isn't it? It's a challenge for existing churches, because they pretty much want to maintain their flock. And I don't want to lump all of the existing church leaders together in one place, because I know that everybody's different. But it seems like a lot of churches are worried about losing control, or losing identity, losing their brand, So when they're doing these new congregations, it's like they roll out these box churches, these alternative sites, and they try to make them all look alike. They've all got to have the same screen, and they have to have the same, projection of the same preacher. So they build these 30-foot tall screens so that he stands there in front of the congregation and looks identical. Well, that's really hard to introduce something like Zume, which is so different. So really, one of the things we've looked for, Mary, is we've tried to look for churches that have a high value on multiplication of disciples. And if they care about that, then they should care about Zume. And one of the things we've volunteered for them is, tell us what you need Zume to be like. So I'll give you, if I can, I'll give you just a concrete example. We worked with a church up in Southwestern Ohio, and they basically said, we don't have a single meeting ever, anytime in our church, that's 2 hours long. So how could we do Zume so that it's shorter? And when they first rolled out Zume, it was basically packaged as a 2-hour identity feature. And if you didn't do the 2 hours, then you just couldn't do it. But I'm so grateful to the developers of Zume, and so thankful to the thought leaders that they've now opened that store up, so we can now take the individual components and we can help a local church like this one in Southwestern Ohio. They've designed their Zume course so that it fits their culture, and it's 1 hour long. So it'll fit into their existing components. So that's one of the things that we see a church do a lot of times, just to restack the components so they don't leave anything out, but so that it fits within a length of meeting, for instance, the format that they already have. That's one idea.
So great. It's amazing how, and Curtis talked about this a little bit in one of our episodes together, is Zume, you can use the tools in the sessions as it is on the website, but you can also just pull them out and do them in a different order or a different timeline. And so it's amazing just the creative possibilities without losing the depth of content and wisdom.
Mary, you are hitting the nail on the head. Can I tell you a quick little background story on Zume? I mean, just a quick little bunny trail.
Please do.
I was on the 9-person team for like the first year that it was rolling out. And I remember the meeting in which they brought us session 6, which contains the explanation for how to do 3/3 groups. And they just had the rough sketches of the videos done. And I'm just going to put it out here. I hope nobody minds. They had hired some actors to do these 3/3 groups. And, it makes sense, because that's what you think you're supposed to do. They had hired these actors who weren't doing 3/3 groups. And because of the fact that the scenes were still rough cut, you got to hear the actors in between scenes and some of the questions they would ask. And you could hear an actor that was on a live mic say, this is really kind of different doing this. I think I might like this at my church. It was just fun. But then you had others that said, hey, where are the M&Ms? I mean, they were just not in the moment, So after we watched all those rough sketches, I just raised my hand gently and I said, I love this. I love the lighting. I love all the people, they're all so beautiful. And then I said, the 3/3 group that I've seen, none of them have people that look this beautiful. And they're not this perfect. And the conversations aren't this perfect. What if we used video from a real Zume group? And then somebody in the group said, you mean we couldn't use our hired actors? No, let's toss this. And it was just so radical that they did it. And we actually did a 3-camera shoot at a real 3/3 group that had been going on for a full year, Mary, and they had already multiplied. And honestly, I don't think it was, exciting, because watching somebody else's 3/3 group is never going to be as good as doing your own. I know that. But I loved the fact that they listened to input. And that really set the tone for me for the whole Zume idea, is that they'll listen to input. The little question that I asked made a huge difference. And so for the first year, the session 6 for Zume contained this real live 3/3 group example that really was a 3/3 group. And I'm not saying that people weren't beautiful. They just weren't actress beautiful, and it was real. It was authentic. Now, later on, of course, we replaced that with, I think, the right thing. We replaced it with a 10 or 12 minute explanatory video about how to do a 3/3 group. So you didn't have to sit through and watch somebody else do one. And I like what we have today better. So somebody else asked a question that made it even better. But I think the principle is, Mary, exactly what we just said. They will listen to questions and input, and they will shift based on what makes sense. I love it. I really do.
That's amazing. So, Doug, you have been a part of this Zume journey either right from the beginning or pretty close to it.
Yeah, since the beginning. Yeah.
Amazing. So what have you observed in this process? What surprised you or shocked you?
Okay, I'll pick out one or two things and then tell me if this is what you want to know. For instance, in the beginning, the concept was, let's try to find a tool that will get them into coaching, because we're not going to fool ourselves into thinking that people will really learn how to do this by watching it on an online format. They're really going to learn it in the coaching. So it was all about trying to get the person into coaching. About 1 or 2 years in, we were coming back with these stories about entire groups and churches being able to grasp this by this online in-life experience, that finally the Zume thought leaders started saying, okay, let's still make coaching available, but let's trust the training. Let's trust the training. And I think it's a surprise, frankly, that none of us in that initial early going team realized that we would be able to learn stuff by this in-life online format. And then, of course, remember, this was like 2 years before COVID that this became a thing. So Zume was an online training format 2 years before COVID. So when COVID started hitting and people needed insight into how to do church at home, Zume had entire training sessions on that. And we saw churches and organizations using Zume to help people make the jump into a world that nobody thought we'd ever have to, be able to, into which we'd never have to be thrust. And Zume was there because I think the power of God, the act of God working in the lives of people like Curtis Sargent, envisioning this before people even ever realized there was a need for it. And I remember in the first year, I had friends who said, Doug, Zume just doesn't work. Online training is never going to work. Nobody's ever going to use online training. And then COVID hit and everybody had to, So I think they had to eat their words. Maybe you might still make a case for, we like community in person more than when we're online. But we had Zume groups in which, remember how the Zume course teaches you 12 people? We started putting 100 people into Zume groups because Zoom allowed us to do breakout sessions for the discussion groups with 10 or 8 or 6 or 4. and then come back together for the main presentations with 500 people in the room. And it didn't matter because we were all watching it right there in front. And we were seeing the video as if it was on our very own screen, 500 of us. And then when we broke up into groups, we could break up into groups instantly without people walking by the restroom or the water fountain. And then when we wanted them back, we called them back and we got them back instantly. They didn't stop by the refreshment stand, Zoom, they were right back together. It was great.
That's awesome. Man, there is so much I feel like we could dig into this together, of just what God has done over these last really less than 5 years since launch.
That's right.
But to take it down real simple, Doug, what do you share with people who don't know anything about Zume at all? Like, what is just your simplest vision cast to them?
I would say the simplest vision cast is tell us what your goal is. And if the church or group comes back and says, well, we're in, fill in the blank, Milwaukee, or we're in Virginia Beach, and we'd really like to get started now in learning this stuff. Mary, there is no possible way that any other training compares to what Zume offers for a church or a group or an org that's in Tallahassee or Timbuktu. It doesn't matter if they're in northern Ghana or if they're in, Sri Lanka. There is nothing that can compare to this tool that can bring training into their living room for this price point and in this kind of a contextualized way. I mean, 34 languages is it right now, with more on the way. Nothing can take Zume into Mandarin. Nothing can take disciple-making movement training into Mandarin like Zume can. Nothing can take disciple-making movement training into a person's living room so quickly and so effectively. Little 5-minute video explainers followed by your group doing it right there in your living room without having to fly somebody in at a cost of, $1,700 for the airfare and maybe $700 during the 4-day training, and a lot of, planning with translators, and a lot of, nothing existed before, and nothing still does exist like Zume. It's literally amazing, Mary.
It truly is. And one of the more recent translations of Zume in ASL, in American Sign Language, was just in the Caribbean this past summer, where my family's from, in Barbados. The deaf are a people group on the finishing the task list. Right there, a little English speaking, so a lot of commonalities to ASL, the deaf group, and to get to share with them, to share with someone who's really engaging there. They were just blown away that there was a training in discipleship in simple churches and multiplication in American Sign Language.
I think you're exactly right. I think the adaptability to be able to embrace a language like ASL is a tribute to what Zume is. The fact that it can be so easily adapted to ASL, that's a tribute. And, that's an example of how flexible that these guys and gals have been that are on that thought leader team. For example, I remember in about the 3rd or 4th Zume course that I hosted, we had several Black Americans in the group. And I began watching the videos through their eyes in my mind. And again, as a tribute to the development team, we would come to those videos early on in which the people who represented evil were represented in Black, and the people who represented, innocent people were in white. And during the session, I scribbled off an email to the fact that, how you can click on the help, the chat, and do an instant email. And I did. I sent an instant email to them, even though they were my personal friends. I followed the letter of the law, and I used the tool to give feedback. I got back a message the next day, and they said, "We never thought about this. the way that a Black American might perceive this. How could we represent this? And so I pulled together 2 or 3 Black Americans and said, what could you imagine might represent a person who's evil? And they tossed out many ideas. Some of them were animals like a wolf, comparing that to an animal like a sheep, which is a very biblical, paradigm anyway. They tossed out several kind of ideas like that got the pump primed. It took about 90 days for those new videos to start rolling out. And I won't forget ever, Mary, watching that same course later with some of those same Black Americans, looking over at them and them looking back and just giving that gentle nod. Hey, they listened. They listened. And that's Zume. The idea that they will hear feedback. I remember doing a Zume course in a place where there were refugee camps and there were no internet Wi-Fi points inside this camp of 5,000 people. And it was difficult. At that time, you couldn't download the app on your phone and use it independently like you can now. And I was trying to sort of follow along and scratch in my head these training events. And when I came back and said, I know you guys really, really have a high attention to try to get this connected with coaching, but would you rather have 50% of the people in the world be able to have access to coaching and let them see Zume? Or would you rather have 100% of the people in the world be able to see it and still have 50% access to coaching? And boy, they listened. And within 1 year, the whole thing was mobile. And the web, which I hadn't even thought of, was now nuggetized. So you can pull out a nugget at a time, a component at a time. And if we were on a visual medium, I would show you, but I would just encourage anybody to go to Zume.vision or Zume.training, either one, and then click on that for instance, Zume.training, click on the word, hover over the word course, and click on the word course. And now every one of those video presentations and the practice that goes along with it, as you know, Mary, are all independently available at Zume.training/training. Hover over course, click on the course and look at those. So what you can do now, because those all have their own web address, now what we're doing is we're reshuffling and readapting it and making this available in PDF booklets so that a person can read a PDF booklet and then click immediately as the follow-up for that paragraph they just read and see a paragraph of text at Zume Training and watch the video and see the homework and put this all together in one easy PDF, like Adobe Acrobat type document, PDF document that you can immediately leap to. All of that was made possible by the Zume team being flexible enough to see, okay, if they want to use it in this way, let's let them. And it really is a tribute to their vision. It really is.
It is incredible. So tell us, Doug, some about T groups.
Yeah, T groups came about because there were folks who were saying, our church just doesn't seem to be the type right now that they will commit to a 10-session course without being able to see what's in it first. And at the time, that was the case. You couldn't really preview the course without taking it. So when they opened up this store and let people start looking at these videos, and by the way, completely for free, they don't charge for one single granule of this course. Every single nugget of it is free in any language. Then it allowed us to basically start dreaming. Okay, so I said to this church in Vancouver, how do you think that you would like to start at your church? And what would work best for you? And they said, well, if it's all about starting a group, let's start a group from day one and let's do the training in the group. And I told them, I said, well, we have been longing for somebody to try this. Are you willing to experiment with it? Mary, they started it and it's been going ever since. From day one, they do the session 6 group as if from day one. And then in the 30 minutes after the 1 hour group, they do 30 more minutes of training. And in about 10 weeks, with just a little bit of homework, they finish the Zume course by doing the actual 3/3 group and a half-hour training and some homework at home. So they get through the course, and by the time they're done, their participants have done 10 3/3 groups together. So they actually do about 3 times the number of groups that you're able to do in a typical Zume course. I love it. I love it that they wanted to get right into studying the word right out of the gate from day one. And now they've multiplied to the 3rd generation using that approach. And we called it T groups, just letting the T represent the word transformation. Some people think the T could represent the word training. We give away this training just because in the spirit of Zume, we couldn't do otherwise. To do otherwise would look really, really bad. And you can just go to moredisciples.com/T groups and get the whole thing there. That's the letter T and then the word groups without any punctuation or any spelling. And it's basically called T groups, a 3/3 group model for churches. And all the stuff is right there. You don't need anybody to start doing it because of Zume. You can migrate through the whole training and implementation just by that one website.
It's beautiful. So I know there are so many stories that you could share at just a drop of a hat of these last few years of Zume. What are just some of your go-to stories or a few moments that have been the most impactful for you?
I think in the middle of COVID, when my buddy Eric Derry and I, and you know Eric, of course, when my buddy and I said, how can we still keep active in doing disciple-making movement strategies, even though it's not currently wise for the people who are more vulnerable, especially, even though it's not wise to pull them close together around a dining room table in a living room, and it's not permitted in many of these cultures. So we got this idea of doing Zume over Zoom, and we kind of tossed out some gentle promotion for the first group, wondering if we would be able to get the 4 people to make it work. And on the day that it was supposed to start, when we had 27 registered, we looked at each other and said, how are we going to do this? And we kind of mapped out some general ideas. We came to that first session of 27 people, and Mary, there were people on there that were literally leaving for the mission field as soon as they could get permission to do so. There were people from other countries that were in that group, and there were local church people wondering how they could use it in their local church. But I remember one young couple, and I'll just call them, I guess I'll call them C and A, you know. They were going to a sensitive place, and they started going through this, and they said, this is what we want to do in our field. They've since left for that field. They are in that place that, again, we shouldn't mention on open podcast. And now they are literally empowering hundreds of other people to do Zume courses. I happen to know last week they got a very large grant to be able to cover the costs of Jesus film devices so that when they send Zume into a new town in their place where there is no Bible yet, people can at least hear the message of Luke in a Jesus film format to get started so they can meet Jesus for the first time. Another young couple, and they were going to East Africa. We did meet in their home. And this young couple said, okay, just tell us how to do this and we'll put it into practice. And I'll just use initials for them. We'll say, E and A, we'll say. I just met with their team leader earlier this week. They are killing it. They have now easily in that family of groups, they have 100 groups going, and their training started and finished, you could say, with Zume. That's how they cut their teeth on disciple-making movement strategies. All of their new groups are now being established by locals. The actual North American workers, they don't have to start new groups anymore. All being started by local people, and they're all being done in the local language. There are no English groups. They're being done in the local language. It's a stellar example of the way that a tool can be used as a catalyst to unlock a movement. It's really fun, Mary.
Amen. So as we wrap up, Doug, what do you wish more people knew about Zume?
Well, I wish they would understand it's not a curriculum. It's not really a tactic or a method. It's not like a program. There's not some Zume office somewhere. You can't dial up Zume. Can't look them up in a Google map and look up their phone number and look at where the office is located. Zume really is, it's a movement. It's a movement of implementers who got together and said, there has to be an easier way to componentize this into a system that will allow people to experience it while they train in it. And those 10 weeks, my first Zume course, and 17 or so that I've facilitated since then, have never, ever once disappointed. It doesn't matter if they're going to go to, some advanced city in France where people consider themselves intelligentsia, or if they're going to go to some, tribal village in East Africa where they don't know a single white person, all points in between. Zume is not a curriculum or a program. It is truly an in-life experience that prepares you to be able to pass on that experience to others. That's what I wish people would know, Mary.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Doug.
Thank you for doing this, Mary. It's an honor to be with you and wish you Godspeed.
Thanks, you too. Thanks for listening. To learn more, go to www.zume.vision. And to be equipped, go to www.zume.training. Have questions for the podcast? You can email them to podcast@zume.vision.